Hello, hello. The extraordinary artist Amartey Golding makes chainmail sculptures that are seductive, threatening, funny and deeply unsettling all at once. And in this podcast conversation, he explains why discomfort might be one of the most important tools an artist has. Raised between London, Ghana, Rastafarian culture and rural England, Amartey speaks with rare honesty about growing up between identities and how that tension became the emotional engine of his work. In this conversation, you'll hear how he learned to trust discomfort as part of his creative language, why audience feedback became essential to sharpening his voice, and how he creates installations that work not just intellectually, but viscerally through sound, light, atmosphere, scale, and the body and the belly. We talk about the emotional labour behind ambitious projects, the crash that can come after making large-scale work, and why sustainability, family life, and building a nourishing environment now matter as much to him as artistic ambition. But perhaps most importantly, this episode offers a powerful lesson in how to develop your own artistic voice. Not by trying to become someone else, but by listening more deeply to the contradictions, histories, and instincts already living inside you. This one is rich, layered, funny, tender, and deeply human. I can't wait for you to hear it. For our listeners, can you introduce yourself, say where you're coming from, and tell us a bit about what you do in your own words?
All right. So my name's Amartey Golding. I'm an artist, filmmaker, or whatever I feel at the time. I'm based out of Norwich. Actually, no, not Norwich anymore. Norfolk. Moved out a bit more rural. I'm in Norfolk, and my work is mainly between violence and vulnerability. More specifically, violence of the vulnerable, or violence of vulnerability, and that kind of tension, that blurry line between the two. And mainly how it relates to masculinity and Englishness. But a lot of it, hopefully, comes across as universal. But those are my starting points. Those are the bits that I tend to gravitate towards.
We're going to dig into some examples, I think, in a minute. And great to see, for those of you who are watching on video, you can see one of Amartey's works behind him right now, which is amazing. So you can tell us a little bit more about that in a short while. But you were born in London originally to an Anglo-Scottish mother, a Ghanaian father, a Jamaican stepfather, raised Rastafarian, moved between London, Cambridge and Ghana. And with all of that incredible sort of upbringing, is there a person or a moment or a memory from those years that you can trace right through the work that you make now?
I mean, there's so many things that come up and bits and bobs, but I think mainly it was a feeling of being caught between worlds, right? Caught between polarities, especially back then. I mean, still now there's a lot of polarization in it, but back in the day, blackness and whiteness were so polarizing. And then Rastafari is so aware of colonial past and, you know, addressing these traumas and history and injustices and unhealthiness and systemic issues and all of that stuff. So I was hyper aware of that. And that clashed a lot with my Englishness, but I was clearly English. So that's something that I've only just accepted recently now, hence my English flag up there. But yeah, so I think the theme that was running through was knowing that I am something. I am all of these things and none of them at the same time. And what that kind of weird grey area that I was is, or the feelings of it, the things that connected all of these different experiences and different communities. Like you said, I moved around a lot. London, but loads of different areas in London. We were always moving house because we're in council houses. So we're just moving. And I lived in Wiltshire for a bit. I lived in all over Cambridgeshire for a bit, Cambridge itself, back to London, Ghana. So, and obviously when you're there, you meet all these different communities, you meet all these different people. And there was always something tying it all together, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it or articulate it. And I think that's what is still there in my work, you know, trying to find that awkward point between these clearly polarizing elements, but how they are actually one entity at the same time. So there's this kind of what connects all of these seemingly separate things. but also this feeling of mentorship or a mentor, like that always kept coming up, like trying to learn through these situations. I never really had like consistent mentors through different periods of my life, which I wish I did have. But you would have a mentor. I would have people that I could learn from each of these different arenas, but none to tie it all together. And so that idea of learning through the work or solutions, we'll come back to this again, but the idea of trying to find solutions or ways of being practical ways of navigating or understanding things. Yeah, those are the two things that kind of tie it together.
Yeah. So that creativity was your way of kind of knitting all those experiences together and processing it.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I mean, I think it spoke to that need to do that. Whether it
Yes.
did it or not for a long time. I think I was just a creative person. I like to make things all the time. But lately, it's helped me start to make sense of all that, and I'm
Yeah.
using that to understand that. Yeah.
So you've given us a picture of the kind of locations for our international listeners. Some of the locations that you mentioned are kind of in the countryside. So we're moving between cities and countryside. But then there's also another layer of kind of belief systems. Do you know?
Yeah, right.
And I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of that, because that's really present in your work, and that kind of real sort of interrogation of belief systems. But we've got a sense of the familial, so your family kind of dynamic and belief systems within that, and then moving into these different contexts and sort of trying to find your way through these different context belief systems. And what did you notice at a young age about what kinds of things did you find strange or enticing?
I mean, it's interesting because again, like things are so different. Things have changed even in the last 5-10 years. But growing up, so we were raised Rastafarian, and one of the ways that we expressed that or understood it was we were ITAL or vegan and vegetarian. It kind of morphed throughout our upbringing. But when we were growing up, people didn't even know what vegetarian was. Like you go there and they'd keep asking, "What do you eat then? What do you eat?" But then you're doing that, and then you're going to the ITAL community where they completely understand that, and it's just logical: whole foods, vegan, clean, all of that. And there's just a lot of different paradigms because obviously you're hanging out there with your English mates who aren't very aware of any of the other systems going on, or like, any of the power plays that are happening kind of socially or in the system. Obviously, one of the famous ones, if you know about Rastafari, you know about the idea of Babylon, or, exploitative systems, unsustainable systems for your spirit, but also socially. And that was something, again, that was like so much part of what we were raised on. But then you're living in a world that's the complete opposite or even antithesis of that. You're in London, which is like the capital of England, which is, the heart of empire and all of this. So it was just a lot of like conflicting paradigms. And then, you'd be in the city and then you'd go out to Wiltshire. Like when I lived in Wiltshire with my granny, I was out there. And again, like you're the only black kid in the village, even though I'm mixed race. So that's another nuance to it. But I would be in heavily black or heavily white environments where I'm either black or white, and trying to make sense of what that means. I've got a really incredible history on both sides of my family, but how I relate to it, how I understand it, that nuance, because each of my parents weren't mixed. They were those different polarities, right? Even though they crossed over, had a lot of different interests and reference points. You've got to kind of just find your way. And that's why, again, I mentioned that mentor or that culture, that someone who understood that specific mixture of things that not only you experienced, but you embodied genetically. Do you know what I mean? And it was it was exhilarating, but it allowed you to choose things. And I think when you're young, when you choose things for yourself, you end up less nuanced. I don't know. Sometimes you feel like you have to negate something in order to go to this side, or forget about that to go to this side, and it can be a bit confusing.
I guess, as kids, we like clarity, don't we? I think, and to some extent, we have a yearning for that,
Yeah,
because that's
belonging,
what.
I guess, isn't it? Like, who are
Yeah,
we? You want to be like everyone else until you want to be completely your own person, and you're kind of, you're caught between those things. But yeah, so like everyone I was, but it was just very extreme in the UK at that time. Like, I spent the first years of my life in Tottenham, and we'd had the Broadwater Farm riots. There was a lot of like political tensions there between black communities and the system, right? Like, obviously, the Broadwater Farm riots was sparked by some police violence and community violence to the police, and there was these massive tensions, and that was, an example of the wider society. But there was, we'd walk past police stations. My mum was very politically involved in the community, and you would walk past police stations, and you knew, oh, a black kid went in and he never came out, or he came out not in the same way. And so, and you're realizing these, but then you wouldn't see that echoed anywhere else. You know what I mean? You go to school, no one would be talking about it necessarily, or you wouldn't hear it on the news in that way. And so, there's these kind of different paradigms and worlds that you're walking in and out of. Down the same street, there's all these worlds happening, and trying to make sense of all that.
That sort of hidden violence and the impact of that. I guess that sort of structural violence and microaggressions, I guess, is something that you excavate in your work now, don't you? So you make those hidden systems quite apparent. So with that incredibly sort of rich and inspiring and challenging in equal measures kind of upbringing, how did you find your way to train as an architect? What was the steps to get you there?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think I love spaces. I love creativity. I never felt like my creativity was limited, despite feeling that I had the right to call myself an artist, but just because I could draw. I think a lot of people who start as an artist from young is because they're the kid in the school that can draw, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're an artist. You're an artist." Yeah. And so I was lucky enough to have that. So I felt like I had the confidence to put my creative hand to anything else, by kind of leveraging that, I guess. But I'd always been interested, like, we traveled around a lot. And one of the places we always went to was cathedrals and churches, wherever we were. And just walking around, there's something about that. And it's still something now that it's like a kind of go-to in my work, to try and create these really contemplative spaces that allow awe. And I don't know, there's something about a cathedral space, or like kind of sacred. So I always love spaces and buildings, and traveling around. Again, you see the ways that buildings impact your feelings and how people move and use the space. So anyway, architecture has always been something that I love. And in all honesty, I was living in the YMCA. I'd left home youngish, and I finished my, must have been A-level. I did a BTEC in art and design or whatever, but I finished that whilst I was at the YMCA. I was there for 3 years, and I was on the waiting list for a council house. But it got to the point where 3 years, the waiting list, I don't know how long it was, but just as I was about to go to university, I got told that I was going to get my council house. But if I chose to go to university, which was in London, I was at the YMCA in Cambridge, then I would have to give up my council house space. So it was a choice between going to university or having a stable place to live. And because I went in immediately, like the first time I went to university was to do like what are they called? A foundation degree. Mm-hmm. So to understand, because I was torn between design and art, and any time I saw art being done at university level, I didn't relate to it. It was this kind of like really nonchalant, oh mate, I'm just making this, oh, do I care or do I not? And I just didn't vibe with that at all. Because for me it was hard work, like I'd put in so much towards my creativity at that point, and I took it so seriously. And I'm here deciding whether to go to university, and potentially giving up the only opportunity to have a house that I had access to at the time. It was a massive decision. Anyway, obviously I ended up going to university to do this this foundation degree, and I was able to do a bit of both. Spend time at, this was at Central St Martin, spend time there, walk around, have a look at the different things, and yeah, that art thing it just felt disrespectful to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've made this choice, made all these sacrifices. I'm working full time. I wasn't able to get a like a maintenance loan or anything for that first year. So I'm working full time. I'm at university, and I'm also seeing these people being so casual about it, these art students, just like, oh yeah, oh well, I'll try this, and this kind of vibe of not really caring. No. So I went to architecture, and it was incredible as well. It was a new course, and it was architecture, space, and objects. So it kind of spanned a lot of stuff, and it had a lot of good promise. And I really liked it because of the way that you approach it. It's like there's a reason why you're making what you're making. It's not just catharsis. It's not just like I feel to do something. It's, you get these briefs and you'd be like, okay, someone lived here for this amount of time and blah, blah. And I was interested in that, I was really interested in in the experience of the end user and making something that was kind of practical. And obviously my work ended up on the more kind of, I don't know, esoteric of fucking design stuff. So there was a lot of friction between me and my, my tutors. And in the end, I left. I did 3 years. And at that time, my art career, I guess you could say, started. I was doing just big drawings, big charcoal drawings. They were just portraits. Could say luck or something happened and I ended up showing my stuff in Dubai. So I'd have a show every year in Dubai and that'd give me enough money to do stuff, and I'd go out there and do that. And so I was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to be an artist. I don't like all these hoops in architecture. And I left. I bought a narrow boat and I left, studying.
Did you? So you did,
Yeah.
you bought a home, a portable home, which,
Yes.
yeah.
It sunk.
And, did it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
But
I don't know
tried.
why that made me chuckle. But
Yeah. Nice one. Thanks, Kerry.
that,
Yeah. It's just one of those things. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things. But
I
I
tell
tried.
you what it is, Amartey. My stepdad lives in Crete at the moment. He built a house with my mum. Unfortunately, my mum died and my stepdad is still there. And he now wants to sell the house. It's 9 years after she passed, and he wants to live on a barge. But he's in his 70s, And so,
Right.
I'm chuckling because what you've just described is my biggest fear for him.
Right.
Which is like, but nevertheless, I understand the calling and I have lots of friends who, so I'm sorry that happened to you. It must have been heart wrenching.
It was intense, man. It was intense.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those experiences. You look back and you're like, haha. It's just, adventures of life, isn't it?
It is. But I want to pick up on something that you said there, because you glossed over it. Like, you made it sound like it happens to everybody. It doesn't.
Okay.
Selling your artwork to somebody in Dubai and then selling enough to make a living from it. Could you just tell us a bit about how did, you moved from architecture and you started making these portraits at large scale. How did that relationship come about?
Right. Okay. So I was always making my own work. Like, I was always drawing and stuff. So at my YMCA, it was probably a room this size.
Oh, Amartey, could you just say for our listeners what a YMCA is, in case there's international listeners?
Yeah. It is based on it's the song though, YMCA. It stands for Young Man's Christian Association, but it's not Christian, or at least that wasn't the experience. But it's just a hostel. So the space that I was at was like, I think it was divided into 2 parts. So you've got young people who are not old enough to be just fully fledged on their own. They've left home too young. And so the state has to kind of look after them, but it's not as intense. You're not, I think technically you're in care. I can't remember exactly what it is, but you're not in foster care or anything like that. It's kind of like a halfway house, I guess you say, hostel. And then the other half of it was for like students and international people but we didn't mix. So they were kind of like different entrances and stuff like that. But the YMCA was a youth hostel. It was slap bang in the middle of in Cambridge, and just a lot of young people who are struggling with at home. And we're all just there together trying to make it work. As it's kind of notorious at the time. If anything went on in town or whatever, you know, the police would come to try and work out who did it or whatever. And there was a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, so that's the YMCA basically.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So back to the drawing story.
Yeah. So at the YMCA in my room, I would always be drawing. So I had a wardrobe, and I'd turn it round and use the back of it to do these large, like I'd put the paper on it and then do these large drawings, and I'd get mates to come in and I'd do portraits. And there's something so powerful about just a portrait, just headshots mainly, but very large, charcoal. And I just do that. That's just what I did and enjoyed doing. And then, I moved to Thursdown, which is in Tooting, when I went to uni. And there were some other halls that I was at. And it was quite similar to the YMCA, to be honest. Loads of just like crazy young kids, just, similar amount of drugs and like craziness going on. But it had a very different, it was read very differently, obviously, because a different demographic of kid. But yeah, so I was there just drawing in my room, and had a girlfriend at the time. And we were all just, rooms in and out, everyone's doors open, and her mum comes in, and her mum runs a gallery in Dubai and was like, oh, okay, these are interesting. Can I bring this out there? And at the time it's hard to part with your work, as you know, like there's something special about it. And each piece is just, I don't know. I struggled at the beginning, so I was kind of reluctant, but my dad encouraged me to do it. And so, sent one over. She was like, oh, just send one over. I'll just see what people think, and sent it over. And then it sold straight away, and did it again. And then she was like, listen, let's have a show. And then I did that every year for a good few years. And that opened up a lot of stuff for me. But I think also what was interesting is it was great. It was a great opportunity, like going from the YMCA and everything like that to then getting flown out to Dubai and selling work out there was a whole different. It was amazing. You take it in your stride when you're young, but now you're looking back at it, you're like, wow, that was a life-changing opportunity. And it was great. But you know that you've got so much more that wants to be said. And I felt like I was exploring it through the portraits.
Yes.
But it wasn't resonating with the audience in the way that I meant it to. Some people picked some things up, but it wasn't as explicit, a drawing is a drawing. People think it's impressive. Oh, someone can draw something that looks like something. And so I knew I liked the spectacle. I knew I liked the kind of show offiness and the grandiose, stuff. But there was a message that wasn't necessarily being picked up. And so after a few years, I'd kind of try stuff, but it was still too close. And I knew that I had to stop that completely and focus on really challenging myself and showing what else I could do in different mediums and stuff like that. So it was a bit scary, because a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, why would you stop that? You can sell stuff,
No, you said you were, you knew it wasn't quite resonating in a way that you wanted to, and that there was something that you were seeking to share and you weren't quite hitting it. So you needed to, and I think it's a really important point certainly for the artist listening. Sometimes we have to let go of good, right, in search of great. And it feels scary, but you had a sense that you had more to say. And what did you think it was at that point compared to what it is now?
There were two things. There was stuff for the ego, and then there was stuff for just the audience that I wanted to communicate. So obviously for me as a person, like I was like, you're not seeing who I am. You don't know what I can do in whatever I want to do, film, like I had all these ideas which were nothing to do with drawing. But the leap from that to, like, if you're only doing drawing and then to convince someone to support you in making, I don't know, whatever random thing you want to do, it felt like a big jump. And so I needed to demonstrate the different things I was interested in and the things that I was thinking, and showing how I work in different mediums. But then as an audience, there's something that you can sit and look at a portrait and you can get a lot from it, but it requires a lot from the audience to be able to do that. And you can't be guaranteeing that people are going to be seeing that nuance. So the things that I opened this with looking at that line between violence and vulnerability, you know, like the characters, there was a sternness and a power about them, but then there was also this vulnerability and maybe sadness. Like there were a lot of things that I thought I was exploring, but it's very subtle. You know, it's the most subtle of expressions to get all of that across. And I wanted to
Yes.
be a bit more explicit in that. Yeah, and explore that a bit more, yeah, directly.
So,
So I started moving into different mediums and taking the leap.
what did you take from architecture in that journey?
Um, Audience, you know, like I say, audience, like the end user, because obviously when you're working in architecture, you have to think about how it's going to be used and what you want to evoke or how you want someone to either use the space or feel in that space. And that is something that I was always interested, you know, with the audience, to make them feel certain ways, and play with those feelings as well. But anyway, so after that, I came back to the UK and fell out a bit with art. But then I got offered, see, and this is the thing, maybe we'll come back to this, but I know that the artist's journey, and this is maybe for other artists out there, the artist's journey can feel really lonely and feel like the whole world's against you, it's just you. But and I'm very lucky, in my story specifically, it has just been like my road has just been littered with people that believe in me and really support me and encourage me to do stuff, basically. Not that I need it, like it's not that I'm not driven, but it's just when I retell my stories, there's always people there, you know. So we're talking about this woman who encouraged me to sell this work. And then when I decided, actually, I don't want to do just charcoal drawings and I need to find a different way of working, I was wanted to take a bit of time out. And then I was offered a residency in Dubai by Sheikha Latifa bint Maktoum, which was incredible. I'd met with her before. And she said, "Hey, look, I'm doing this residency. I want you to come over for a year and just make work." And I was like, mate, I don't think so, man. Like, I don't know about this art thing. Like, I think I might just make my art for myself. And I think I wanted to set up it was called Grill Organics. It was like a food restaurant, like selling grilled vegetables, basically. And I was like, mate, I'm on it. I did the Prince's Trust, like, you know, business thing. And I was like, listen, mate, I think that's it. And she was just like, And then my girlfriend at the time and my mum were like, dude, what the fuck? You're an artist. Like, you're not a chef or whatever. Like, this is a great opportunity. So I ended up going, and it was so incredible. It was such good timing because I was given enough money to survive for that period of time. I was given a studio space. I was given access to the community in Dubai and just make. And
Wow.
so what was amazing with that is I was like, right, okay, I've got these big drawings, but it's just about show. Like, how much of this is just about the impressiveness of, oh, he can do big drawings? And how much are people getting what I'm trying to say? So I explored a lot of different things at that time. But one of the things I did was, okay, I want to work in a medium that is understated, because obviously drawing is that, it's the primal thing. Oh my God, he could draw something that looks like something. So I thought, right, I want to work in a medium that's understated, where that wow factor won't necessarily be there. And I want to change the scale. I want to go super small and see if my work still has power or what's going on. So I did this series called Gabosia, which is a series of print making, like intaglio. It's dry point and monoprint. It's a bit of a mix because I'd never done it before, so I just kind of made it up, I guess. They had a print workshop there, so I just learned how to do it there, and started to make these really small, like, you know, the smallest one's about that big, and it's probably my favorite piece. And I was just thinking about storytelling through image, but also composition and everything like that. And so this series came about, which were kind of illustrations of a story, or I guess you could call a mythology that I created around my dad's death, which happened in 2009, but I was still processing it. And he was coming up a lot in my work. which I didn't realize. But when you have that time to look back and you're like, well, what's there? And my dad just kept reappearing. So I thought, right. And one of the things that really stuck with me was he had, so when I say my dad, it's my stepdad technically, but he was around, and, we're really close. And I think he had about 14 children in total with different people. And after he died, everyone had their own version of him. That was now the fact that they were revisiting, and like, oh, dad would think this or dad would think that. And a lot of time it would contradict. And I was just really interested in how we use people's memories to facilitate or justify the lives that we want to live, basically, and how we co-opt people's memories who have passed to help us as tools in certain ways. And the role that story played in that. So I thought, right, instead of it happening subconsciously, let me get conscious about it. I want to create a story that's going to help me process my dad's death and make it feel relevant and make sense. Because there were a lot of mysteries around how he died and stuff. And so I created this story, which was called Gabosia, and this seed collector character. And it was all really fantastical and massive and crazy. And then I did these illustrations, depicting certain elements of that story. And that's what I spent that year doing, basically, which is really interesting. And that really changed things for me, because I went from doing these big drawings to doing really understated, at least for me, it felt understated. They were much smaller, but they lent a lot more into this energy that I was talking about, this kind of, there's like the melancholy, and there's a lot of things going on. You can't quite put your finger on it, but there's this kind of tension between different elements. And that was really quite exciting. So that was probably one of my most important, or the most important body of work that I've made, to be honest, because it was sent me on this trajectory that I'm in now.
Yeah. And it sounds like you did both, which is you went internal in order to excavate something that was important to you and that you wanted to learn about and that you wanted to grapple with. But because you're so conscious also through your training and thinking about, how people might relate to things, how did you share it, and what was the kind of reception to that work? What did you learn from how people saw it?
I mean, it was really interesting. I think that was more like, you do something and you try it. You trial it and then you get the feedback. And I think that's one of the things about the kind of design process as well, which is like you can think in your head a lot about stuff, but you have to trial it out and then get that feedback and tweak. And what was nice is that in that environment, people were coming into the studio all the time. It was literally an open studio. And so I was getting a lot of feedback and able to tweak stuff. I think what I liked was like the kind of uncomfortableness, like honing that dial of something being beautiful and powerful, but also a little bit disconcerting. And I think what's interesting, though, is that the draftsmanship was still there. So people were still able to be like, oh, okay, I might not necessarily get it, or it might unnerve me, but it's done well. So I can trust that there's, more to do here. So people spent a lot of time with it.
Actually, it's a really great point, though, Amartey, because I think it gives us a clue in when listeners see, hopefully, some of the clips and the images that we'll share of your work. I think that slightly disconcerting, sweet and sour, beautiful but challenging, but desire to really connect. So using something familiar in order to kind of destabilize what somebody knows is something that runs all the way through your work now, right? So it sounds like you found your voice in that moment, by being given that platform and that opportunity. It helped you to go deep, but also to bring it to a broader audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. But again, I think finding your voice is like, it's a process, it's like, it's more like spending time with your voice, listening to your voice rather than finding it necessarily. Because I guess for me, it's always been there, but it's working out how how to listen to it and give it the space to manifest itself. And also it evolves and changes and develops with you and stuff like that. But that was a time where I was able to actually just sit and be with my voice. And I mean, that opportunity was incredible. Shout out to
Yeah.
Tashkil and Sheikha Latifa. They're doing some great stuff out there.
I'm so glad that you put it that way, because I think I can really relate to that listening deeply. I think it's something, particularly in today's kind of society, I think, we pride ourselves on being busy and having lots of fingers in lots of pies and whatever. And I think often we can overrule our inner voice, can't we? And we can override it because of the other things, like participating in some way feels more important. But the other way of participating is to really listen to what your contribution really is. And it's often a little different when you listen deeply to yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
So really understand, like, actually, I didn't realize this was a thing that I needed to say, actually,
Exactly.
And so it's great. I'm so glad that you've had champions all the way through your career, people that could see your talent but want to support you. I wonder if we could take what you've just shared with that sort of establishing moment and fast forward, time travel to a current or more recent project where we can take those ingredients that you've given us that form all of your practice now. Could you walk us through a recent artwork or project and take us right inside it, how it began, what it asked of you, and the moment when you kind of started feeling it had something, it was coming alive?
You know what? I think I'll talk about Silent Night because you've seen it as well. And you saw it before we got in touch, which was nice. And we didn't know each other. So hopefully you have some memories that are unbiased, whether you'll say them or not. But
well, in all honesty, I have to fess up to the audience. The reason you're here is because of the impact of me seeing the work in Liverpool, which was at FACT, the Foundation for Art and Creative Technology, which is where I used to be the director of exhibitions. So I know those spaces very well. So when I say to the listeners, it was one of the most impactful artworks that I've seen, like, in decades, really, I'm saying it from somebody who's also presented in those spaces. Do you know? So I'm saying it actually, it had such a powerful impact on me. It makes me feel emotional thinking about it now. I stayed with it for so long that I wanted to meet the person who could create those atmospheres. I wanted to meet the person who could make something so oddly unsettling, but also super powerful. And so I'm glad that we did, but I'm also glad that I can share it now with everybody else in our community. So yes, I wanted to
thanks for that. That was a really lovely lovely intro to it. I mean, to be honest, it's a show that I'm really proud of. There's a few works, to be honest, that I'm quite proud of, and this is definitely one of them. So I was invited by FACT, the learning team. In fact, actually, they had a project that'd been going on for a number of years, and they'd been working with incarcerated men in local prisons in Liverpool, because FACT is based up in Liverpool. And they reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, we've got this opportunity, we've got this project." They actually introduced it to me as wanting me to explore the family side of incarcerated men, the impact on the outside. But that kind of grew and evolved. And as I spent time with the men and had access or didn't have access to families, it just kind of became what it needed to be in the end. But I think we were working on it for about 2 years. This was a really interesting journey because I'd been kind of like prison adjacent for a long part of my life. Like I said, growing up in Tottenham with that tension between the police and what was expected of a young black man, and where the places where you might end up, places where a lot of family or friends have ended up, there's always been a kind of cloud that follows you. And so much of what I've done in my life is to make sure that I don't end up in an environment like that, right? As in like arrested or worse. And so it's something that's always occupied a lot of my psyche in the background. And my stepdad had spent time in prison. cousins had spent time in prison. In fact, the last time I had been in one was to visit my cousin. So ironically, I actually felt quite confident about it. It was a great opportunity to be able to be working on that side of a prison when you felt like you might be on the other side. I mean, there's still time, but hey. But yeah, so I jumped at the opportunity to be able to do it. It was incredible. And the team as well, the learning team seemed really quite sensitive and insightful. And this was around the time as well where I was coming to grips with my ADHD, which I'd kind of just accepted that I had, and was like trying to find ways to communicate that and those needs to the people I'm working with, like producers and stuff, because that's yeah. So anyway, and they were just really great people to work with. So so we started on this project. I knew that I wanted. I mean, what's so interesting is I was going to be making something with the men, or at least based off the conversations with the men. But you can't stop your mind from already thinking what you're going to be doing or what you might want to do before you meet them. And when we went in there, I thought over a period of time I'd be able to work with the same group of men. So at first I was going to be able to work with, I think, a group of veterans who were in prison. And that was something that I was like, great, wonderful. And so I met them for the first time, and then the group just kept changing. Each time I was there, it'd be different. And the thing with chainmail is you need a lot of hours to get proficient in it, to even just learn how the weaves are. But then you need to be able to, like, to build up speed enough to make something. You need to be spending a lot of time, maybe at least like a week or two before your speed starts to build.
I know you find the art world baffling sometimes. It is. This is exactly why I built the membership. Inside the membership, artists rebuild their confidence. They reignite their pride. They recover their sense of play and finally feel like they belong. They land studio visits, sales, shows, better fees, stronger relationships, and a genuine sense of agency. Here's how it works. You get the online membership hub on your laptop or phone and gain instant access to every live session, replay and worksheet, as well as an active community, so you're never stuck waiting for an answer again. You get weekly advice sessions with me where you can ask me anything you're stuck with, and I'm going to give you straight, honest answers. And you get coaching with me at an affordable rate. Plus, there are real life meetups, expert webinars, monthly studio visits with members, and 4 guest artist studio visits a year where you can ask your own questions live. And the best bit? It's an affordable price every month, and you can cancel anytime. So please don't keep struggling on a loan. Try it. 2 months from now, you could have answers to things that have been holding you back for years. So you decided ahead, just to introduce the chainmail to our listeners. So this was something you decided that you wanted to do with them ahead of time. Could you describe what chainmail is to our listeners?
Yes. Okay. So I'll start by explaining chainmail, and then I'll explain how we got onto choosing chainmail. Thanks for that chronology there. But yeah, so one of the materials I've been working with for a decade now, can you believe? Chainmail. So chainmail, yes, it's that medieval, material that protects you from, slices and stuff like that. I came up to it because I love, again, I was talking about that line between violence and vulnerability, but also, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, my nostalgia for these things. Like, I enjoy violence in some elements. There's something that kind of is enticing about it. I like combat sports, I like action films, and I love, like, the idea of histories and knights in shining armor and all of that stuff. That's something that has always been quite, like, nostalgic. It gives me a good feeling, and I've always been interested in how something so violent and horrible can make us feel so, uplifted somehow, especially in the English psyche. I'm sure in loads of different cultures as well, but for me, the idea of castles. I worked at Norwich Castle. I did a show there, and the idea that people go and get married in places where people were tortured, like people were hung. It's such a cathedral of violence, when the Normans came. I mean, that's one of the oldest Norman castles. In fact, maybe the oldest Norman castle in the country. So that was not used as people weren't getting, the general English public were not getting married in there. It was not a romantic thing at the time. It was an extremely violent and oppressive object. But now it's associated with nostalgia and romance to the point where people want to get married there. And that was something that was interesting to me. So anyway, wheel back. So I've always liked these kind of swashbuckly films. And I thought, right, I'm going to do a high fashion collection of clothes or garments that the models can't carry. They're not strong enough to carry down to the end of the runway and back. That was my starting point. I love the idea of the weight of chainmail and the idea of protection, perhaps. But for me, it was just purely materialistic, and I wanted to kind of have fun with it. And this idea was in my head for about 6 months, and I finally got a new sketchbook, cup of tea, found some time, sat down, and started to do some sketches for this, high-end fashion collection. And then my godson called me. It was just the weirdest timing. I was like, hey, hello, man, what's happening? We hadn't spoken in months. And he was like, hey, can I come stay with you? I was living in Brighton at the time. I was like, yeah, why? What's happened? And then he told me that one of his friends had got stabbed to death where he lived in Manchester. And he went to London. And then within a week or two, another friend of his got stabbed to death in London. And there's me drawing this stuff about chainmail, and this reality is happening. And obviously you're like, oh, it's an old material, there's a kind of play between irrelevant materials, but actually it's completely relevant. And maybe if people were wearing this at the time, maybe they would be alive. And so that took a whole different angle on it for me. And so I started making these chainmail garments. The first one was actually for my brother Solomon, who was in the Royal Ballet at the time. And I made a garment that weighed more than he weighed. It was like a kind of poncho, but it was so excessive, like usually chainmail is efficient because it's heavy. You don't want to weigh any more than you have to. But I like the idea of like over egging that protection and that feeling of wanting to protect my loved ones. And so we made the first film, Chainmail 1, where he basically performed in it until he collapsed. And that started off this journey of making these kind of ceremonial, excessively heavy chainmail objects. And then I've explored making chainmail without people wearing it. And, chainmail has just now become part of my vocabulary. So that's a little intro into chainmail.
Thank you for sharing that incredibly moving story. But so it makes sense then. So in visiting the prison, chainmail was already in your mind as something that you wanted to work with.
Well, actually, so I knew that what's interesting is when you're working with people and communities, at least for me, every artist does this differently. But for me, I still need to have my own creative space. I don't want to just do, okay, whatever you guys want to do. Like, I'm not an art therapist or something like that, I'm an artist, and I'm coming to summarize and get a feeling for what your energy is or the stories you have or our relationship, and then make that's my skill set, to translate that into an object. And so, but I wanted people to be involved and have ownership as well. And so what I decided is, instead of just say, okay, we'll do whatever, and it could end up, wherever, I gave them the choice of 2 ongoing projects. And this was important to me because I didn't want to just go into, like when I was living at the YMCA, you'd have a lot of people come in to do projects, and they might make something for you, and it had a bit of a patronizing tone to it. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, okay, let's make something that you want to make. And then you go away and it's not related to anything. You're still in your world. You just got this weird fucking object there that they've made, or like, fucking handprints somewhere or something. Do you know what I mean? And so I thought I wanted to make something that was part of an ongoing series. So somehow their input was part of a wider conversation that was happening outside of the prison also, but in wider society. This kind of inter-community dialogue, I guess, is something that I quite like. So Chainmail is a project that I've been doing for many years. And also Whose Anthem Is It Anyway is a project that I was doing for many years, which is a comedy show where the audience are guided by a local comedian to create a new national anthem for England. So I offered them those two, and I thought there's no way they're not going to be doing a comedy show in prison. They get a local Liverpudlian comedian come in, take the piss out of anything, and then we've got a new national anthem as well. It's live music, it's interactive. I thought that's it, hands down. But I'll throw in a bit of chainmail just in case. But I wanted to, the illusion of giving them choice, right? Anyway, little did I know, I spoke about them both. They loved the idea of the comedy show, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, and this was a 2-hour meeting. Meanwhile, I brought in a bit of chainmail for them to feel. And one guy was just cradling the chainmail. It was about 25 kilograms. He's just cradling it for the whole 2 hours. And then we started talking about the chainmail, and it really resonated with them. And I was surprised because I think when you spend a lot of time in the arts, you know, you're in very middle class spaces, there's white walls, it's all theoretical. But actually this work, and this is it was really eye-opening as well, but this work really resonates with them. You know, I showed them the other work that I'd done, the suits, the garments, and it really tapped into that kind of primal need for protection, but also that feeling of power when you've got the weight there. And all of the nuances, they just got it. And it really resonated. And one of the guys said, if we put something in chainmail, it's something that can't be edited or taken away. You know, there's a permanence of it. Yeah. And they liked the permanence. And I thought, okay, this is wow. And so it became quite unanimous that they wanted to work with chainmail. And what was quite interesting is at that time, I didn't realize that I wouldn't be able to work with that specific group throughout the whole period. Like I said, it turned out that I'd be there for a day, have 2 sessions. And even in those 2 sessions, there'd be different people. And so that was something that I kind of had to juggle at the beginning. And it got me a bit disorientated. I like a bit of control when I'm doing this stuff. Do you know what I mean? But actually, in the end, it felt really beautiful because there was this kind of, I don't know if you're allowed to call it Chinese whispers now, but there was this kind of like someone would make a decision. So, you know, the original guys made the decision of working in chainmail, and then the next group kind of inherited that decision and then had to make something of it. And then whatever conversations or whatever, however the project had, you know, grown or evolved, the next people would kind of get, and it grew like that. So at the beginning, that was quite challenging for me, but by the end, I really enjoyed that process. But we'd started to make chainmail, and it's a very slow process. And I thought I'd be able to make most of it with the guys. And obviously you've got the ethical questions as well, which were all around this. You know, you're making work with literally captive people. I mean, they can choose to do it, you know, they weren't whipped to it, but the choice out of what, stay in your room for 24 hours or make chainmail and have biscuits, you know, it wasn't really. So, you know, what do you do with that? How does that ethically fit? And it's something that we kind of sat with for a long time. Obviously you can't pay people, you can't get people's private details, you can't do any of that stuff for safeguarding reasons. And also, you know, it's just a really complex space. And also this was a private prison, which is interesting as well, which brought up, you know, and when we were working there, anyway, there's just a lot of things were going on with this project. But yeah, so basically we started making it, but the chainmail making was really slow. And so I quickly realized that actually I'm going to have to make most of the chainmail with like my team, like the studio team that I had with me. And so we'd make it back in Norwich and then bring up what I've made for my next session and then go back and still incorporate what the men were making. But it was very small squares that they were able to make in that period of time. And so you'll see on it, there were kind of patches of different pieces of metal and stuff, which was cool. But mainly we made it. Like I made it back in the studio, and we're having a lot of conversations which were just incredible and so like eye-opening. And I think the eye-opening element of it was that it was just so normal. It's just, you're just sitting down with people, spending time with men, and it was like a knitting group, ultimately just a masculine knitting group. You know, we're knitting with steel and we're just sitting there and reasoning and sharing stories, and it just got real deep real quick. And I love spending time.
Mm.
And I think actually that's one of the things that comes up in my work a lot as well. Time, almost as a currency, as an offering to the subject.
Mm.
If you see the chainmail and you start to look and you see that every ring we've made by hand and then had to weave, there's something universal about the amount of time that something takes.
Yeah.
And if someone has made something that has taken 2 billion hours, then there must be an intrinsic value to the subject that they're talking about. And for me, that's something that's quite important,
Yeah.
and always has been, to be honest, with the chainmail, and with a lot of other stuff that I do, like that idea of time and craft as an offering to the subject, and the importance. Suits of armor are usually known as, it's the gentry, it's the upper classes. They were so expensive, these suits of armor, to make back in the day. Chainmail was a bit cheaper, but still it required so much work to do. And so usually, you imagine suits of armor in these old manor houses of someone's, great earl, somebody. And so they're not only practical forms of protection, they're also signs of power and importance ultimately, and worth, right?
Mm.
And so I love the idea of making these really elaborate suits of armor that take just as many hours, but to bestow this idea of worth in a contemporary context to people who I think are worth that consideration. So
Yeah.
anyway, so we started having these conversations and we kept making this work. And I then started to ask them to make just a sketch, just a symbol, something real simple, that could be more of a permanent stamp. Because at the moment, every time they made some chainmail and we put it in, you wouldn't know who did it, or you wouldn't be
Mm.
able to find your own part. And so you'll see there's some symbols on the garment that ended up, like, towards the end, we started getting them to draw some
Can you
symbols,
can you describe some of them, Amartey?
some of the symbols. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, if people watching this feel like I'm being a bit vague with the stories, I've been in trouble quite a few times for giving too much information.
Sure.
You know, I can't remember what they call it now, but it's something about keeping people safe, basically, and not being able to know who I'm talking about,
Of course.
because there's victims, and these people are also vulnerable. So, so some of the symbols are a spider,
Mm-hmm.
which was quite a hard one to do. I ended up asking him to do these symbols, and then I got these symbols, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this out of chainmail? But what was really interesting is, as I started to make them, the limits of the chainmail and the way that I started to do the symbols, they actually started to become almost like Neolithic symbols or something really
Mm.
ancient, because of the simplicity and the way, and it started to become really universal as well. You see these kind of symbols in a cave somewhere, or I don't know, somewhere in some ancient artifact, and so it kind of like started to morph into this universal, primal object of safety and entrapment and suffocation and empowerment. But yeah, so we've got the spider. We had a bird, just a real, how you do as kids, like just that,
The
like
wing
that,
shape. Yeah.
just that kind of almost McDonald's M flattened a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was so beautiful. I had an arrow. So what was interesting as well is I was spending time with the guards as well, right? Because they're in these sessions, and I'd asked them to contribute as well. And it was interesting because when we were having these conversations, I mean, this spanned years, right? So there's so many interesting points of view on this. But one of the things was, obviously, in prisons, there's overwhelming representation of people from certain background, right? One of the things actually that I was really surprised about is everyone was white, which is obviously, it's a white country. But if you go to different areas, you have a lot of black people in prison, and also you have a lot of TV shows about black people in prison and stuff like that. And so the thing that just struck me was, it's just such a white prison. And there was only 3 people of color that I saw in the prison. One was me, one was one of the security guards, and one was another mixed race old guy who had been in the prison for some time. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so demographically, obviously, working class or lower than working class, whatever that is, benefit class, I guess you could say. But there's a certain background of people that are on this kind of conveyor belt to be going into areas like this. And what was really interesting is the guards were from similar backgrounds, at least some of the ones I met, and didn't necessarily want to be ending up here, and I don't know how much more I can say, but there was just a lot of parallels between these people who end up having to spend their time in this place in order to, for whatever reason. And so there are some symbols from the guards there as well, which is really interesting.
So,
So yeah,
Amartey, could you describe the finished piece as you presented it? And because you ended up incorporating audio as well, and the way it was lit and what was underneath the object. So try and describe the object for us if you can.
Okay. So what we ended up doing, so like I said, usually I make these suits of armor, right? And this was the first time I'd made a suit of armor for a community of people rather than an individual. And this is also the first time that one of my suits of armor hasn't been worn. So we planned for it to be carried. It weighed 200 kilograms. But it was made for multiple people to carry. And we usually carry these suits until we collapse. But the problem is obviously health and safety in a prison. It's a lot more strict than when you're just out as an artist doing what you want to do. So we tried for a long period of time. And then the last minute before we were going to shoot, they said, no, you can't do it. So so that was kind of interesting, but I still wanted to process the wearing of it, the fact that this is to be worn and the visceral feeling of it being inside and being activated by these people or stories. So it's important to say the first place it was shown, and it was really important to me and the team at Fact, was the first audience was going to be the men in the prison. Because we'd spent so much time working on it together and they needed to see what it was. And also their stamp of approval, because if they didn't like it, it's all about audiences, isn't it? If they didn't like it or if they felt exploited somehow or something, I don't know, that wouldn't really have sat well with me. So we went there to get the seal of approval and they enjoyed it who was there. But it's a really transient prison. So some of the people who'd worked on it hadn't been on it, weren't there to see it. One of the guys who actually at the beginning who had decided to do chainmail had been out and then come back in to see it set, not on purpose, but he just found himself back in prison and saw it, which was kind of bittersweet, I guess. I don't know, but it was nice for someone to see it from the beginning to the end. So that was the first place it was shown. And then afterwards, it was shown at Fact. And so basically to describe what this looks like is it's almost like, one of my starting points was blurring that line or pushing the kind of language of something that is protective but also comforting, right? And so I kind of, it's called deep button tufting, but it's a technique, an upholstery technique that you'll probably see on like Chesterfields or something, when you get that button that's really deep and it creates these kind of, diamonds between the buttons. But I like the idea of it not looking like just this kind of solid thing, but playing with almost being furniture or like a duvet or a quilt, these kind of quilted things, like when you're a child and you wrap yourself up in your duvet and you feel like you're invincible, if you've had a bad dream or something. So that was kind of the starting point. But obviously it's 200 kilograms of chainmail. And so it's kind of taken the form of almost like a cone, almost like a traffic cone.
But human size, right? So like it.
Yeah, well, it's about 3 meters. It's about 3 meters tall. And then underneath, we had loads of basically legs, so just people being in there. And a lot of people saw it in the show and they thought it must be real. Like, because they're just like, people with trousers and short and jeans and trainers standing underneath it, like almost like it's a number that you can't quite count. I just like that idea of a kind of faceless community underneath it, just this body of people. And so, but the way that it's lit is that those feet are in the shadows. So the first thing you see is this kind of huge, almost pyramid or triangular object or entity, this metal thing, which is intricate, but also like a monolith. It's made of all these little pieces, but it just feels like this one big presence in the room. But the lights are kind of from the top. So this metal is glistening. And then you kind of see in the shadows that you've got these feet underneath of all of these people kind of huddled together. And that's a really interesting tension. You've got something that's kind of imposing, or at least a solid, but then you've got this kind of hiding and concealed element to it, which is nice. And what I decided to do in the space was to create a space, because so much of this work was about space, right? And society. And the people, the more time I spent in the prison, the more I realized that the conversation was actually about us in society outside of the prison. We have these people that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, but it's the basis of how our system runs, this idea of like we're protected, or we're also kind of being threatened with that as an option if we don't stay in line. And for some people, or for some communities, it's not something you think of at all. Prison's like, okay, yeah, we know it exists, but, and for some people, you're kind of raised with that always in the back of your mind, that's somewhere, you've got to do everything that you can to not end up in that place, because otherwise you will do. And so for me, it was important that the art space wasn't outside of that conversation. The arts is a very hostile and hierarchical space, which is very much, it's also a microcosm of how society works, who belongs, who doesn't, who has value, who, so many people, even artists or curators or people who have been in the arts for so many years, feel this kind of edginess or vulnerability in that space, and I thought that was really quite interesting, but also trying to acknowledge, the hostility and the hostility that this space also represents, and how people can feel very vulnerable in these spaces. But also I tried to connect that to other systems and other ways that this interplay of vulnerability and hostility is at play. So we ended up getting some pews they were like church pews really, for seating, but I did them in rows. So for me, the idea was to kind of echo the idea of a courtroom, so this entity, so all of these chairs were kind of in two main rows, all facing this huge garment, which was in the corner and with the lowest ceiling of this room. And so I wanted to feel like, to play with the idea of a courtroom. So this object is being judged, or this group are being judged, and there's this kind of hostility, but also of a school. So the school system is something which, it's like your first touch point with where your role is going to be in society. And for a lot of these people in the prison, and myself, neurodiversity is overrepresented there, right? If you don't get on at school, if you can't quite work with the sit down and look at the front, then that could be an indicator that you might not end up in a comfortable place. And so this idea of this kind of almost Victorian style of learning, where we're all sitting in rows and looking to a kind of authoritative figure at the front. But also then you have the church, right? The chapel. Yeah, a space of redemption and forgiveness and transcendence and reflection and solace and sanctuary. All of these different feelings that I wanted to, and again, see, they're all conflicting, right? But then they're all so similar at the same time, because there's obviously a lot of power and hostility with the church as well.
Yeah, I think there's something that I felt before. I don't like reading panels or titles before I look at something. I like to feel my way through art. And I really felt like the sort of the patriarchy, which is inherent in all of those systems that you've mentioned, and the kind of the sort of the consequences of the patriarchy on masculinity even felt really clear to me in the work, you know, and it gave me a kind of, I think because there's audio as well, which we'll touch on, I think, and the lighting, the atmosphere of that kind of the beauty and the horror of that violence written upon men, by men. I think it was the first time that I considered it. I consider it all the time, especially in my job as a coach, because I coach, you know, men and women, and I'm always talking to people about how systems of power have impacted the individual. So I'm uniquely aware of it. But I think there was something about that somatic knowing in relationship to an artwork that was really important, because I think that accessibility of that knowledge, so I didn't need to be an arts veteran, if you like, to know it. I really enjoyed knowing it in my body, in a sense, that's what you were communicating to me, which is why I knew it was a really smart work, if you like, because the seduction of the materials and the labour in the materials and the care and the love and but also that you could create something that was so complicated and it presented so simply, I thought was really important. So I really picked up on that. But the audio was quite important too. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, by the way. It's so nice to hear people speaking about your work. And again, it's that feedback, right? Like for me, the audience is so important, and hearing how they're getting it is, you bring it into your next work, but also you're able to work out what your work means. Because once your work is out there, I know people always say it's like a kid, you know, yes, you make them, but then they take on a life of their own. But it's just so interesting to hear how it lands and whether what you wanted it to landed, or whether something more special came up. So the music, I mean, first of all, like you're talking about somatic, like for me, it's all about the visceral. So we're communicating this. I'm having to use words, but ultimately it does something in a different way. And it's all about the stomach. You know, for me, it's about the belly, making stuff from the belly. And obviously we're talking about it now, so it has to become more theoretical. But there are also things that our words can't quite touch on that it does. And that's what I'm interested in. And the overlap between design, you know, the space, creating a space for that kind of reflection and that feeling of these things that we can't quite communicate, not in our media, not in whatever. And this, you know, bridging between different communities of how these, you know, feelings happen, how we can feel it in a, you know, something that's such a masculine story can be felt by a woman in her stomach and understood. And in any other way that people kind of see themselves, whatever kind of area, there's a universality to that feeling, which is what I'm trying to get at when I make work. And so the sound, it's all about the atmosphere. So the lighting, first of all, for me, like, dude, when I'm making something and I'm creating a space, every sense and every element of that space impacts the experience. And so there's nothing that is taken for granted with regards to like, oh, okay, there's light. Why is that light on specifically? Why is this? Like when we walk in, how does it feel? Do we hear, and some things you can't have control over. And that's something that I've like over working with lots of different spaces and restrictions and working with, mate, there's some things that are like, dude, just lock down the whole street. Okay. This is important. Thank you very much. Let's do what we need to do. So sometimes there are kind of like restrictions that you just can't get over, but you know, sound for me, every light does something, right? It draws the eye or takes the eye away. Sound is another one that is so important. The only one I haven't really worked on yet, but I do have I've been sketching a project for ages, which works on, this is smell. That's something that I haven't properly been able to get into yet. But so with the sound, I wanted something that was atmospheric, that kind of blended, like created a background that can hold the feeling in the conversation, but also can guide you through depending. But also a song that the same words, depending on how you frame it, can be different entities speaking. right? So I ended up choosing a song by Lauryn Hill and Vera Lynn and mixing them together, because obviously Englishness, like, we're in a context here and there's a specific history, and I'm really proud now, again, my England flag billowing, like, this is a big development for me, but I'm really proud and feel kind of privileged to have access to the English story, because it's so part of so much, and a lot of the stories aren't good, but it's so intrinsic to so much of how the world is organized today, across the world, across continents. And so being able to come to kind of like the belly of the beast, or the starting point, or that, try to question that kind of patient zero and work out what's going on in that dynamic is really exciting for me. And being able to sit with Vera Lynn. And for those who don't know, Vera Lynn is kind of like a wartime singer. Incredible. She's like archetypal. Like, if you play some of her songs, especially We'll Meet Again, which was like this wartime, beautiful song, but it's got that melancholy because it's someone singing about seeing someone again, and they kind of know that they won't see them again because they're going off to war. And it's the idea, maybe I'll see you in the other world or not. How do you sing to someone that you know is never going to come back and die in this foreign land? But it's kind of been taken on as this nostalgic, feel-good song almost, for a certain generation, or a certain idea of Englishness and Britishness, which I was always really quite interested in. And I was working on a project that I originally wanted to use this song for, which didn't work out, but it was around lockdown time. And Vera Lynn lived to 100 and something, I can't remember exactly. And she died during lockdown at the height of Black Lives Matter. And it seemed like Vera Lynn dying at that moment was the death of a certain type of Englishness. And we had to find ourselves again, but we didn't quite know what are we now, and we're in this state of not understanding. And we held on to this Vera Lynn idea of Englishness and stuff, but when she died, it felt like, that moment of, actual change and shift. So I thought it was an important voice to grapple with. But this idea of an element that we're beckoning to meet again, even though we're not sure whether we will. Has this died? Has it not? I like that idea of trying to, maybe singing to yourself, or when you were talking about this masculine heavy element to it, the idea of masculinity is a weird one now. Again, we're in this like change period, which is kind of unhealthy. We're not quite sure. You've got all of these Andrew Tates and this hyper masculine weird online scene, which is really popular. And and men are trying to understand how they relate to the rest of society and themselves and women and anyone else. And it's a confusing time. But also there's a love there, like, they want to be valued and understood. They just don't understand where that value sits or how to access it or not. And it's really complicated, but I thought this song was really something that's quite beautiful. And to mix her voice with, Lauryn Hill and Vera Lynn doing a duet, it's like, what the hell? But what's so interesting is, me as a young man, so much of my learning was done through singers like that. And again, they transcend, right? It's somatic, it's visceral, the way that Lauryn Hill is able to communicate and tell stories and sing, and just, again, it transcends that kind of logical part and goes to the stomach. And many artists like Lauryn Hill, but they've been guides to me for certain elements of trying to understand myself as a man, a person, a spiritual being, or whatever. And I thought her song, I think it's X Factor. But and it's a tune, mate. Like, if you're from my age, maybe older, that song. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill was like, there were just so many songs. Like, it's romance, but it's deeper than that. It's proper soul moving stuff. And this song is about speaking to this person who one of the lines is, love is like a battle and we both end up with scars, right? And obviously if you think about that of two people, you've been in those toxic or, toxic but exhilarating relationships. But also I feel like we as a society are like that. Yes, masculine and feminine in society trying to have this tussle and damaging each other in the process, but also just so many elements of society are trying to work out. We are trying to work out how we can do this with ourselves, with each other. Like mental health there's just so many elements that I think this kind of battle and these two entities that know they belong to it, they belong together, but not knowing how to do that healthily. And in trying to do that, they're damaging each other. But there's this willingness, like no one has ever loved you the way I do and no one ever will, kind of thing. Yeah, it's just so powerful, that song. And I thought it was perfect for all of those. It just encapsulated everything in such a simple love story. It encapsulated all of this toxicness and this relationship that we're kind of struggling to get with. But so those are the two songs and kind of an overview of why I chose them. But most of it's to do with the belly. And it was a live performance of Lauryn Hill recently coming out and singing that song live. And then I chopped it up. I separated the vocals, separated the backing. So you have this kind of like almost spiritual, churchy harmonies of backing singers singing. And I just repeated that. So it's like this and just going. And that was the basis for it. And then I put Lauren and Vera over the top. But I gave them both their space and kind of brought it down an octave or two to make it sound this hyper masculine, almost unworldly, spiritual song story thing, which just like absorbed the space. And what I love about that is it's familiar, but not enough. Like you recognize it, but you're not quite sure, and it kind of seeps into the subconscious. You can look at it, but not only as, oh, I remember when I bought that album when I was this. It gives you another way to access the depth of that song. So the audio was extremely important, and that looped. It was about a 10 or 12 minute song, and that looped. But each time you listen to the lyrics, you could hear it as yourself, as men, as society, as the system, as women. You could put a character to those words and listen to it again and again, and it gives you a kind of different angle. It's kind of infinite in that sense.
Yeah. Amartey, thank you so much for sharing. We get a real sense of how you think through meaning making with others, but also a sense of all of those nuanced thinkings that go into making such an impactful thing. And I guess it's fair to say that there was a lot of love and labour in that project.
Right.
And so, I'm curious because there are people in our audience, whether it's curators, producers or artists themselves, who know what it takes to pull off an artwork like that in a space like that and to have an impact with a wider audience. And it takes a lot of people, a lot of investment, a lot of time. And there can be, I don't know if you experience this, but there can be like a little crash or when you come off those projects. So there's only so many of them in a year that we can do, right? So I'm curious, with all of the ways that you love to work, what are you thinking about now in terms of how you want to put energy into your work and what kind of projects you want to work on? What would an exciting new opportunity look like for you now?
I mean, it's interesting because I still go to it with the belly, right? But I think for me, it's about sustainability. Before, it was project after project of that. That was it. And it takes so much out of you. And like you said, you have a crash after. For me, usually it's during, right? Because these are like marathon projects that span years, right? So yeah, it's all about the opportunity. I mean, now I'm working on a new body of work where I'm making flags, the English flag out of chainmail. and I'm just making that for at least a year, let's see, making different types of flags and just exploring what that means. The end point, which was kind of where I started, but now I'm here making just flags that are wieldable sizes for me, is I wanted to make a huge, 50 by 20 meter flag out of chainmail, which I'm sure would weigh a ton or two. And kind of carry that into a space and have everyone be able to walk on it, sit on it, wrap themselves in it, and wrestle with this thing that is England and our legacy. But also to be able to take us, is it pride? It's just an interesting, mix of things that I'm kind of exploring right now. And I've never felt comfortable calling myself English, let alone having an England flag here. But I wanted to think about what it would take for me to be able to access that. What kind of flag would I be okay to have there that I feel incorporates all of those kind of that messiness and everything that it is to be English without, denying that I am English. So at the moment, being able to make stuff in more of a healthy way, making every day, or at least, as often as I can, is part of the process and I enjoy.
Drawing remains central to your process, right? You like drawing and you sketch on the regular.
Yeah. So like I said, I started out drawing. I've always been drawing. But recently someone really insightful said, "Oh, all those sketches that you keep doing, can I have a look?" And I'd never thought, for me, like I said before, there's a show element, and then there's what you do, your workings out, the magic kind of behind, the bits and bobs behind the magic trick. But actually being, showing that has been something that's quite liberating to me, actually, like showing my workings and, being able to show some of those quick sketches. I think there's something as well that's really quite liberating is when you work in such big statement pieces like that take years to do and they're so complex, you can think that the complexity is what gives your work the strength. And so it's actually been quite interesting now after a big project like that to really sit back and be able to, again, analyze the simplicity of, because yes, they're big complex projects, but there's a simple core to it. And actually that can come across in loads of other things that I do. So not having to make it as complicated or draining or convoluted and still have powerful work or interesting, being able to make interesting statements. Actually, I'm going to shout you out. There was one of your podcasts that I recently watched, which was like a cartoon,
Guy Richard Smith. Was it Guy Richard Smith? Yeah.
Yeah, and he does like sketches for like cartoons for newspapers and stuff. For
the New Yorker, Yeah,
absolutely. And I thought it was really interesting because my sketches have kind of become a bit like that as well. That not necessarily as I don't know, immediate as that, but they're kind of weird sketches that have this kind of comedy and melancholy to them. Which has been quite exciting. So exploring that as well, exploring my, easier work. Well, I say easier, but just making every day and allowing, being an artist,
Being an artist. I love that. I think I love your drawings. And I think one of the things that I've seen you develop from that starting point that I really enjoy now is that taking complex systems and making them simple or accessible for people. Mm-hmm. But then, like you say, I think it will be music to a lot of listeners' ears that the process doesn't always have to be complex to be impactful, And so finding a system that works for you, that nourishes you, that you enjoy doing on a daily basis. Actually, when you really allow yourself to be in relationship with making in that way, other people can still see it, So when I look at your drawings and I get a real buzz out of just how I like weird stuff, Amartey. So, I really... They're not
weird, are they? Weird? No. What are you talking about?
Everything could be weirder as far as I'm concerned. The world is weird. And so I think what I love about your drawings is all of the issues that you talked about in your sculptures, in your films, in your everything is there. The drawings are three-dimensional, but they're, they bring in characters and they bring in, the kind of the complexity of identity and the construction of identity. They're playful, but they're also that sweet and sour. So for me, actually when somebody can bring themselves to any medium in that way, it means that actually you could create an incredible show from that. So, I love the fact that we can see one of your sculptures behind you. When we say flags, when everybody looks at the images, they'll see they're not flags in the traditional sense. They have these kind of phallic elements kind of coming off them in chainmail. And,
for those listening, for those listening on the podcast, not just sitting there making England flags that look like England flags. Yeah.
No, they're really sumptuous, gorgeous things. But I think one of the things that I'd love to just come to a close on, Amartey, is that you've built yourself a system in your home and your family life that nourishes you and your creativity. And I think that's really an important thing I'd like to share for our listeners. This idea that you can make incredibly impactful work across these different media, but from being outside of a centre, because you live in the countryside again now, don't you? And
yes,
you have your vegetable patch, and do you mind me sharing that? Because I really
love
think
it. Yeah.
It's very inspiring to know, like, you raise your kids, so you're, you have a family life, and you make work and connect with people. And I think it's really important that you've created an environment where you can go deep with something, but you can still give yourself that kind of safe space to make complex work, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's actually lovely that you bring it up because I guess as an artist, you do get, at least the way that I've been working is it's been all consuming. And there was no space or time for anything else. And it's sometimes it can be really hard to see your blessings when you're in the thick of it, because you feel like you don't have what you need, therefore you don't have anything. Sometimes you can feel completely alone and just stuck with it. And even just retelling my story here, we haven't even got onto any of the the big things that happen, but there has been so many blessings and luckiness and access that I've had that I didn't realize until when I look back. So many people supporting, so many opportunities that have opened up, and there are so many things here that I can be so grateful for. And when my daughters came, I had to make that choice. And the irony is that I realized, okay, I can't do the art in the way that I've been doing it. These, like we were talking about the Fact Project, these year-long intense deep dives that take nothing that I can do nothing else with, and like I literally get out of the skin of my teeth looking like Robinson fucking Crusoe, or something. And then having to rebuild myself before another one comes or whatever. And it takes a toll on me. It's always taken a toll on me, and I've known that, and I've wanted to change that, but I've kept doing the same thing. And when my daughters came, I realized this isn't sustainable. I'm not going to be able to be the parent that I need to be for my daughters and the partner I need to be for my missus if I keep working this way. So I'm going to have to make a choice. And funnily enough, the choice is family. Even if if no one ever realizes what a creative genius I am and my work all disintegrates and that's it, I'll be happy if I'll be able to focus on them and I've spent that time with my family. And it sounds obvious, right? But when I came to that realization, it was a massive whoa for me, because at the time I'd been completely defined by my art. That's been my main calling. My friendships, relationships, so much had been put to the side for that. And so for me to realize, okay, that's gone now I'm focusing on this. The irony, when I let all that go, is when everything started to come. I could look at what I was, I could look at the work I was making, I could look at what made me happy, what I needed to thrive as a human before anything else. And my love of gardening and everything has come up. And that's what I love to do. Spend time in the garden. We're growing our vegetables, spend time with the kids. That's what makes me happy and allows me to thrive so that I can make work in a more relaxed way. Because we were talking before for any of these artists, for some people listening, this might be helpful to you if you're an artist, but desperation is not sexy, right? No matter what situation you're in, it's not sexy. And if it is sexy, that the person who finds desperation sexy is not someone you want to spend much time around. And so I went through a lot of my life so desperate to be seen and understood, but also to make a living off my work, and it was desperation that was fueling everything, a lot of the decisions that I was making. And a lot of you will be desperate because it's hard living, especially if you're living in one of the, the big cities or whatever, or if you don't have family supporting you. That desperation is there, but it's trying to find that point where you're making out of life, you're making out of excitement, Again, I've heard you mention before, Kerry, this starving artist thing that everyone thinks, and people have the audacity to say it. I know there'll be a lot of artists here who have been told it, when you finally explain to someone how you just can't bear it anymore and your life is just like, what is this mess? And people say, oh, well, it's going to be good for your art because look at that bloke who cut his ear off or whatever. Look, that's not, they made art in spite of that. But imagine if they were able to make work and just be in a healthy place and make work. I know that I make my best work from those places of abundance, and excitement. And I'm lucky enough that there's this kind of delusion that I've had for a long time of feeling fucking abundant despite not being abundant, because I'm obsessed with my work and I'm excited about what I'm making. And so even when I've been in some dark place, I've been able to make it from the abundance. But anyway, that was a big tangent, but ultimately, yes, I'm living here now, out in the sticks, been so blessed by the universe to be in my dream house, being able to grow my vegetables with my dream children and my dream partner, and everything's wonderful. So now I can start really making some good stuff and doing it from a place of fun, bigger isn't always better.
No, that's right. I think thank you for sharing so much, so honestly with us today, Amartey. As always, it's an absolute treat, and maybe we'll get you back for a part 2 when you can tell us about some of the other lucky people that you've encountered over the next few years, and you can tell us about where life takes you. But finally, how can people stay connected with you and your work, Amartey?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, Amartey Golding. Amarteygolding.com is my website. You can check some of my stuff out. But I would say, if any of this has resonated with you, just drop me a message. Let's be direct. I can show you some of the work I'm doing, and I'd like to see yours too. But no pressure. You don't have to show me anything. But yeah, if anything resonated, we can have a chat. Just reach out. We're humans at the end of the day.
I love that. What a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much, Amartey.
Thank you, Kerry.
What I love about Amartey's work is it refuses easy resolution. It doesn't hand you a neat moral position or a clean answer. Instead, it sits you right inside the tension. Beauty beside brutality, humour beside grief. It reminded us that your voice isn't something you suddenly find. It's something you learn to listen to. Something that deepens the more honestly you sit with yourself, your contradictions, your histories, your discomforts. And there's something incredibly moving about the way Amartey approaches making. Even when he's creating monumental installations or chainmail works weighing hundreds of kilos, he still talks about art through the body, through the belly, through feeling first. I also think there's a powerful lesson in the life he's building around the work. Moving out to rural Norfolk, growing food, raising children, creating from a place that nourishes him instead of constantly extracting from him. In a culture obsessed with acceleration and visibility, that feels quietly radical. This episode reminded me that extraordinary work rarely comes from pretending to have everything figured out. It comes from staying in relationship with the complexity, staying curious enough to keep listening to your own voice as if it shifts and evolves. And perhaps that's the invitation Amartey leaves us with, not to run from contradiction, but to make it something honest and from inside it. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.